Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do my final January wrap up. Alright guys, we are a few days into February. It is honestly Wednesday after work. I usually film on the weekend, but this weekend had a lot going on. The sun is setting. I'm hoping that the lighting doesn't change too much or anything like that, but we are gonna bust out this video as quickly as possible. This is gonna be more of a rapid fire review kind of situation because I read a lot of books in January. If you're interested in seeing what books I read in the first half of January, I will, as always, link that up above as well as down below. This will just be reviewing the books that I read in the second half of the month, and that comes to a total of 15 books, 14 which I finished, as well as one DNF. I did take part in a competitive readathon this month, which is why my numbers are so much higher than usual. These are not my usual numbers. I honestly don't even want my numbers to be this high, but it just is what it is, and I want to talk about these books with you. And I am not going to give too in-depth of a review. I am a little bummed that I didn't end up vlogging this month, so you can't go to any other videos or anything, but of course if you want to know any of my additional thoughts on these, you can ask me down below and I would be happy to give them. That being said, before we get into those 15 books, let's just go through some basic stats for the month in its entirety. So this month I read a total of 22 books, which is definitely higher than usual. I would say usually I'm pretty happy if my number is between like 11 and 13. This is almost double that amount, so it was a good start to the year. I'm very confident that I'll reach my goal of reading 100 books this year. That is for sure. As far as page numbers, I read 3,919 pages, so it wasn't just that I was reading a bunch of short books, though I definitely had a few of those, but I was also just pumping out more pages as well. As far as audiobook hours go, I read 69.35 hours worth of audiobooks. And as far as my average star rating, it came to 4.23, which is also a great start to the year. I always want my average star rating to be above a 4-star, and last year my annual average was just slightly below it, so I'm trying to be optimistic about achieving that goal this year. But as far as my star breakdowns, I did have that one DNF book, and I do not rate my DNFs. And otherwise, I didn't have anything below a 3.5, which is super exciting. We had 2 3.5-star ratings this month. We had 12 4-stars, so there was a ton of 4 stars this month, but I think a 4-star is a really solid rating. We had 4 4.5 stars, and we had 4 5-stars, which I feel like I usually don't have that many 5 stars because I'm relatively picky, so I'm super excited that I got 4 of them this month. All right, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first review, which is gonna be for the book I DNF'd. First DNF of the year wasn't just a DNF of a book, but a DNF of a series. I ended up DNFing In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. I did get a little bit over 50%. I think I got like 52% through this book. This is the second book in the Love Light Farms, or at least the first book in the series was called Love Light Farms, and I read that kind of during the Christmas season. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to continue with this series because that book was kind of like meh, but I decided to give the series a second chance this month, and obviously I'm not going to be continuing with it. This book was just too cheesy. It was too Hallmark the whole time I was reading it. I was like, this is a little bit on the lame side. And in this book, we are following Beckett and Evie, I believe. And both of those were obviously present in the first book. Beckett is someone who lives on the farm. He also works on the farm. And Evie was actually the social media person who had come into the town to kind of film the farm and see if they can win the competition that they were hoping to win in the first book. In the second book, Evie is coming back to a town. She's just not super happy with how her life is right now, and for some reason, her being in this strange town that she's never been to and doesn't really have people she knows in it was the happiest she's been for a long time, which I guess should show you just how crappy her life is going right now. But she and Beckett actually have some history. They had a one-night stand some months, years ago, and it seems that both of them still fondly remember the other. I think that this book was just giving me too much insta love, and that it was just a little too much on the Hallmark side, and I think I just really found myself bored with this book and with very little interest in seeing where this relationship went, so I happily DNF'd it. As for the first book that I actually finished here, in the second half we have A Dark Harmony by Laura Thalassis, and this is the last book in the Bargainer series. This is a book that follows Callie, who is a siren, as well as the Bargainer, who is a fae prince. At the beginning of this story, Callie calls upon the Bargainer after murdering her stepfather, someone that she was very heavily abused by, both physically and sexually. So there are some trigger warnings in this series for sure. And she kind of bargains with him to help her cover up the murder. And she eventually ends up asking him to come back again and again to kind of be her friend, to be someone that she can talk to. Being a siren, a lot of people try to avoid her because she has the ability to glamour humans and kind of control them, which makes her very dangerous and the kind of person people want to avoid, but that also makes her incredibly lonely. However, one day she asks the Bargainer to make a deal that he will always stay in her life, and this deal, his magic accepts it, but it also sets the price, and that price is that it won't let him return to her for 7 years. The book technically really starts with him finally being able to return to her and asking her to come to the Fae Kingdom because there is a mystery occurring there where male knights are disappearing. So are the female knights, but they are eventually being returned, and they seem to be pregnant with some sort of vampiric children while simultaneously being in a comatose state. I have really been enjoying the series. I gave the final book a 4.5 stars. I would say that as far as the villains and the mystery goes, it's all pretty predictable, pretty basic, nothing out of the realm of things you've seen before. I did think that it had enough world building for me because I am someone who, when it comes to romantasy, do want a decent amount of world building in it. I don't want to just have to kind of assume things about the world, so I think Laura Thalassis did a good job with that. But the main thing I really enjoyed was the romance. I really love Callie and the Bargainer, whose name I'm forgetting right now. That's why I keep calling him the Bargainer. I want to say Desmond is his name. But either way, I really enjoyed their banter all throughout the series, even though they kind of get together in the first book. I really enjoyed their relationship all throughout it. They had a lot of back and forth. They really pushed each other to be better while simultaneously really protecting the other one. They were both creatures of darkness and violence and sex, and they just really fed off of each other's kind of darkness and grittiness, and I really enjoyed that. So I had a lot of fun with this series. You will have seen the novella for this series on my worst books of the year because I hated it, but everything else in the series was a wonderful time. Up next, I finished the last novella in the Loath to Love You series by Ali Hazelwood, and that was the Below Zero one. I don't remember the name of either of these characters. That being said, I did go ahead and give this 4 stars. Out of all the novellas, this one was definitely my favorite, but I think I really enjoyed when the other characters from the other stories kind of got involved. That's something I really enjoy about companion novels, when the other characters from the other stories start popping up more and more in the background and playing a bigger part. It gives me slightly more found family vibes, and that's something I really enjoy. I will say that the main character in this book did slightly annoy me when it comes to the female main character. I think she really didn't give the male main character the chance to explain himself. There was definitely a part of me that understood why she was upset, but in the end, especially because she ended up being wrong, I was like, you know, it's kind of hard for me not to be on his side when he was right all along, and you were kind of like, I hate to say this about a woman, but overreacting about it. So I did struggle with her a little bit, but I think as far as male main characters, he was really big, strong, protective, instantly in love with the main character, wanting to protect her, wanting to support her. Nothing new from Ali Hazelwood. Just overall thought that the story was relatively interesting. There was some drama and whatnot going on throughout it, and I think as far as a novella goes, it was pretty well fleshed out. Up next, I finished another audiobook, and that was That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human by Kimberly Lemming, and this is the last book in the Mead's Mishap trilogy. As far as I know, there's only 3 of them, and there's not going to be any more. Once again, I don't remember any of the characters' names. I usually look up a synopsis before I come on here to, you know, refresh my memory, but this synopsis doesn't have their names in it, so I don't know what it is. But we have a male dragon who has kind of set off in hopes of finding his mate, but before he sets off on that journey, he decides to stop by another dragon friend of his to kind of check up on how he's doing, considering that dragon had lost his mate many years ago and was just, you know, kind of in a very depressive state. However, when he shows up at this dragon's keep, he realizes that that dragon kind of has this human woman trapped there, and he realizes that this human woman is his mate, and so he kind of snatches her and takes her off and tries to convince her that she should be in love with him and that they should be married. And she was like, I've been trapped by a dragon for years. You think I want to be trapped by another dragon? No, thank you. I just want to go home. These stories are just a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars. The audiobooks are well done. I think that they have a good sense of humor. I think that they're really sexy. I think as far as plot goes, this plot I think interested me the most. I think especially after the second one, I was excited to do a bit more exploring of the land around the village that these characters came from, and overall, I just had a really fun experience from it. I don't take too much away from the books, but they're a good and quick read. Up next, I finally read The Mask Following by Samantha Shannon. I was technically supposed to read this last year because I was doing a read along, and I think they read it in November, and I didn't have time to read it then, so I read it this month. And this book was kind of going to decide if I DNF the series for good or if I will go ahead and pick it up again once the series is completed. So this is the 4th book in the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. She is kind of, I guess, rewriting these books, and then I want to say this series is going to be like 7-8 books long or something. So I figured no matter what, I'm going to go ahead and put this series down and wait until it's completely out, unless I hated this book, which I didn't. I gave it 4 stars. Again, like I gave a lot of the books this month. Part of me was kind of upset that I enjoyed this book so much because I'm like, great, now I have to wait like years until the series continues. In this book, we are following a Paige Mahoney, and she is a clairvoyant in a world where it is illegal to be clairvoyant. She lives in London, which is ruled over by a government called Scion, I believe, and they work very hard to capture, imprison, kill people who are clairvoyant. However, she is part of a underground clairvoyant gang, and one day while she is out, she ends up getting captured, and this capturing kind of opens a whole new world to her, kind of shows her what is behind the curtain, and we go from there. I can't really tell you too much about this book other than it was way better than book 2 and 3. I felt like plot-wise, the pacing was a lot better. The author was doing a really great job of world building while simultaneously actually moving the plot forward. And I found myself rooting for the character a lot more. I kind of started to get a little bit annoyed of her, a little tired of her, but I was definitely on Paige's side once again. I did like the PTSD representation in this book. Paige is really pushing herself. She's been through a lot, and the author definitely shows through her character that is starting to take a toll, but she is also fighting really hard for something that I can't tell you about, but she's definitely pushing herself to the limit in this book. But we also got to meet a lot of new characters, and we had some new locations and whatnot opened up, and I am definitely excited to go ahead and see what happens next, because the way that this book ends was so disrespectful. The fact that Samantha Shannon finished this book this way and then decided she wasn't going to continue the series but instead was going to rewrite the previous ones. Rude. Up next, we had another audiobook, and that was Mammoths at the Gate by Vo. This is a collection of novellas of the Singing Hill cycle. This is the 4th one, and I believe it allows me to catch up to the series. I have really been enjoying this series all throughout it. This one I went ahead and gave another 4 stars. In this book, or in this series, we are following Cleric Chi, I hope I'm saying their name right, and they work at an abbey that kind of collects stories, and they spend most of their time traveling and actually collecting stories, but in this book they are returning home for the first time in years. I feel like there were certain aspects of the story that I liked less than the others, because I feel like it was a little bit less focused on storytelling, but there were also themes in this one that I enjoyed a lot more. They are returning after being away for years, and they have obviously throughout their travels changed a lot, but their vision of home has stayed the same. And when they show up and realize that home has changed a lot, including that one of their mentors has recently passed away and that their friend has moved to a higher position within the abbey, they're kind of struggling to find their footing again. I think that this one definitely does focus a lot on grief, not just through Chi and the fact that, you know, the place they called home is no longer the place that they have been carrying with them all these years, but also as we watch different people at the Abbey, specifically one member's grieving of the loss of this mentor and just their desire to share stories about this person to keep them alive longer. So I did really enjoy this one. I think it was a solid 4 stars. I'm just not a huge novella person, so I tend not to give them super high ratings just because I want more. But yes, definitely glad that I went ahead and picked this one up. Next, we have A Girl Like Her by Talia Hibbert, and this is the first book in the Ravenwood series, but it is technically the second book that I read because I've already read book 2 many years ago and have recently decided to go ahead and return to this series. In this book, the couple that we're following is Ruth and Evan, and Evan has recently come to this town to work as a metalsmith. I believe he had worked as a metalsmith in the military, but he's now out of the military and is just trying to move forward with his life. And one day he decides to introduce himself to his neighbor and realizes that it's a young woman named Ruth, who seems to be a bit of a outcast in their town. Ruth does have autism. However, the reason people stay away from her is because there is a certain rumor revolving around her that involves the son of Evan's boss. Evan, however, has no love for his boss's son, and so he is more than happy to ignore everyone's warnings to stay away from this woman. And as the two of them spend more time together, obviously they start to fall in love. I gave this book 4 stars. Surprise, surprise. If you had a bet on what I gave a book, bet 4 stars. But I really enjoyed the autism representation in this story. I think that it was very difficult to watch Ruth be so ostracized by the people around her. She very much kind of accepted the way that people treated her. She just kind of assumed that it was what she deserved, despite once you hear the story, you very much know that she did not deserve that treatment whatsoever. It was really great to just watch Evan be there for her and kind of respect her boundaries while simultaneously being stubborn and not letting her push him away, because she is a bit of a B word at times. You know, her personality is not something that a lot of people would mesh with, but it meshes very well with him. He kind of likes a stubborn, kind of bossy, bitchy girl, and that is exactly what she is. And she starts to realize that there are people who can like her just the way that she is without her having to change. And so this was a very heartwarming story. I thought that the smut was relatively good as well, and overall I just really enjoyed my reading experience of it. Talia Hibbert always does a good job with the representation, so glad to be reading more of her work. Up next we have volume 4 of Fence by C.S. Bacat, Joanna Lafuente and Joanna the Mad, and I gave this, what did I give it? 4 stars. So this is a queer YA sports comic. We are following Nicholas, and he is attending a relatively prestigious school, more prestigious than he's ever been to, on a sports scholarship for fencing. And throughout the series, we're just following him and his teammates as they are practicing and going to competitions. I sometimes feel that this comic is a little bit slow. The pace that it's going at, I'm like, how long is this comic series gonna be? It's gonna be super long with how dragged out it sometimes is. But that being said, the authors do a really great job with just having you root for the characters. I really do enjoy all the characters, Nicholas, and all the side characters as well. And when they go into competitions, or even when they're just practicing against each other, it just, the stakes seem so high and you seem so invested and you're like cheering for them. And so the authors do a really great job of getting you invested in the competition and the characters' individual journeys. So I am going to go ahead and continue this series for however long it goes on. Up next, I actually want to talk about 2 books at one time because they are in the same series. I did technically read 1 book in between them, but we're just going to talk about these at the same time. And that is Heaven's Official Blessing Volume 7 and Volume 8 by Mo Sheng Tong Shui. And this is the last 2 books of this series. It's over, guys. We made it. And I'm a little sad about it, but also, you know, happy that I finally got to see the ending of this because I was always stressing about how this series would end. I ended up giving the 7th book 4 stars, and I ended up giving the 5th book 5 stars. In the series, we are following Shilon, the guy here in white, and he was the prince of a prosperous nation, and at the age of 17, he actually ascended to godhood. However, after a lot of misfortunes occur to his kingdom, he actually becomes known as a god of misfortune and falls from godhood, and then he ascends, and then he falls, and then he ascends a 3rd time. And throughout the story, we are kind of following him in present day, as well as gradually getting flashbacks to his life as prince, as well as the 800 years between his 1st ascension and his 3rd ascension. During his 3rd ascension, he also comes across Hao Chen, and Hao Chen is actually one of the 2 most powerful ghost kings, which technically makes him an enemy of the gods. However, he and Shilon get along like 2 peas in a pod, and Hao Chen is, one could definitely argue, obsessed with Shilon, and they go on a lot of journeys and missions together throughout this series. I feel like this is one of those series where I would really enjoy rereading it, because at times I felt like there was so much going on, so many time jumps, so many characters, that it was a little hard to keep track of. But overall, I really did enjoy this series. I think books have been struggled a little bit with pacing, just because I was kind of like, come on, let's go, let's get to the end, let's see what's gonna happen, you know, let's move it along a little bit. However, book 5, actually only half of this book is the end of the series, while the other half is a collection of short stories that occur after this series completes. So the 5 stars encompasses the fact that I was very satisfied with the ending of this book. It definitely made me shed a tear, but that I also really enjoyed the short stories. This series actually makes me laugh quite a lot, especially the short stories. I was like, oh my god, you can't be serious right now. They were making me laugh so much. They were always like just a little bit ridiculous, but I really had a great time. Loved these characters, really grew to be attached to them. They've been through the ringer, and they deserve nothing but happiness. So definitely suggest checking out these 2 books, and we'll see how long I wait until I jump into the next series by this author. All right, the next book, which I technically finished in between the 2 books I was just talking about, is Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer, and this is the 3rd and supposedly final book of Annihilation, which is kind of a sci-fi horror, I would put it towards horror story, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. Now, my experience with this book was a little bit up and down, and my rating definitely increased towards the end. But I should say Annihilation is a story that follows people and their interactions with a place known as Area X, and this seems to be an area that has been touched possibly by alien life forms, and it's causing people to change, it's causing the environment to change, and it seems like it may possibly be expanding. And here in the last book, I mean, I really can't tell you much about it, but I would say while in book 1 and 2 we follow from one point of view, either outside of Area X or inside of Area X, in this story we are following multiple points of view from different timelines and from different locations. So it really is just pulling everything together for the climax of the story. And while I did feel like in the beginning it was dragging a little bit, eventually in the last quarter of the story I found that I was really starting to get invested in the characters, was really starting to get interested in what was going on, and overall I was just really happy with how this story ended. I thought that it was a very satisfying ending. I kind of ended that story like, yeah, That's how things should have gone. And as always, I do think that Jeff Vandermeer has a very interesting way of writing. I did read the first two books physically and started this book physically, but then I decided that I was just gonna read it too slow that way, and considering I was in a competitive readathon, I had to read faster. So I ended up listening to the audiobook, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. I was kind of worried that I wouldn't be able to understand the story as much if I didn't read it physically, but I think that I was still able to digest the story just fine, and had a really great time. If you didn't love book 2 the way that I did, I would still go ahead and check out book 3 just because it's very different from book 2 and possibly even from book 1. Up next, I read Warriors of book 5, A Dangerous Path. I will say that just yesterday I finished the 6th book in this series, and I'm like trying to remember specifically what happened in this book since I already read the next one, but I will say that I gave this book 4 stars. In the series, we are following Fireheart, and he was born a kitty pet, which pretty much means he was a pet. He lived with humans, but he decides to leave that life behind so he can join the Warriors of ThunderClan. ThunderClan is one of 4 clans within a forested area, and these clans all live semi-harmoniously. They all worship a clan known as StarClan, which is where their dead warriors ascend after they pass. And while they do technically acknowledge the fact that in order for there to be balance, there needs to be 4 clans, that doesn't mean that there isn't plenty of fighting over prey and over territory and whatnot throughout this series. In this book, I believe they are facing an outside threat. Throughout a lot of the story, we were kind of battling one clan or another, but in this case, there seems to be an animal in the forest that is not supposed to be there, and our cats kind of need to figure out how to handle this threat. I think that I struggled a little bit with the pacing in the beginning of this story. It was a little bit slow, but once the action part happened, I was like, go, go, go. I am always down for some cat drama, and I really enjoyed the way that this story ended. I think that Fireheart found himself in a very difficult position in this story where he very much had the trust of the leader, but the leader was kind of starting to feel the strain of all the bad things that was happening to her and her clan, and it was starting to negatively impact her ability to make logical decisions, and he was having to kind of balance a respect for his leader while simultaneously trying to make the best decisions for his clan because his leader was no longer able to do that. But I also think that the way that that kind of issue was resolved towards the end was really well done, very bittersweet ending towards the story. Well, I wouldn't say bittersweet, but it was kind of like, yes, you know, this is the end of an era and we are starting on a new path now. Yeah, so really enjoyed this book, and you will be able to see my thoughts on the last book in this series in my mid-month wrap up for February, since I already read it. All right, and I just realized I skipped over this book. I actually finished this before I finished the Heaven Official Blessing books, but that is Iron Widow by Sharon J. Shao, and this was a reread for me. This was one of my favorite books of, was it 2022, I think? And one of the challenges was to reread a first book in the series, and I decided to read this one because the second book was supposed to come out in April, but it seems like unfortunately they are pushing the publication date back again, potentially all the way into 2025. Why they are doing that, obviously, when I say they, I don't mean the author, I'm talking about the publishing company and why the heck they're doing what they're doing, but they did, and I was very upset because I think I found that out, or the author announced it like a few days after I finished my reread of this, and of course I gave it 5 stars again, and I was just, my excitement for the second book was just reinvigorated, and now my soul has been crushed but I actually decided to read this book via audiobook this time. The first time I read it physically, and this time I did audiobook, and really enjoyed that experience. So both physical and audiobook consumption of this book is great. In this book, we are following Zaytan, and she is a young girl who, well, not a young girl, a young woman who lives in a poor village, and her older sister had been sent to the front lines of the war. And this war is actually being fought against aliens, and in order to kill these aliens, the army uses chrysalists. And these chrysalists are being powered by a male pilot and a female pilot. And in most cases, the female pilot ends up having all of her chi sucked from her and ends up dying. And her sister was actually killed even before she reached the chrysalis, meaning that her pilot killed her, and our young woman here is out for revenge. So she joins the army with the intention of killing this young man, but unfortunately before she is able to kill him, there is actually an attack and she needs to get into the chrysalis with him. And there she actually ends up killing him because of her chi being actually stronger than his. And so as punishment, despite the fact that she fought very valiantly in this battle because she killed a man, you know, and men can kill women whenever they want, but women can't kill men, you know how it is. They place her with their most powerful warrior, who is actually a criminal who is only being kept alive at this point because he is so powerful, and they are putting her with him in hopes that he will overpower her and kill her. But instead, the two of them end up being a perfect match, and the two of them decide that they are going to go ahead and use to their advantage how important they are to this war to try and change things. This book is definitely very feminist focused. If you are looking for a book with strong feminist themes, you will definitely find it here. It does have a polyamorous relationship in it as well that slowly develops throughout this story, and our main character is disabled because she is the victim of foot binding. There was a part of me that was worried that upon reread I wouldn't like this book so much. There was something about the shock of the ending of this book that I was worried that the impact of that was what gave it 5 stars, but I just think that the world building and the character development and just the female rage in the story is so well done that you can't help but absolutely love this story. I definitely think that despite I think this maybe being YA, that if you are looking for a good sci-fi book, that you should definitely pick this up. Maybe wait until the second book is like actually released and on shelves. Otherwise you'll be like the rest of us, constantly waiting for it, like a little carrot being dangled and then brought forward again. But yes, no, this story is so incredible. 5 stars. So well written, and really think that the author deserves better than what they're getting from their publisher right now with all this ridiculous pushing back of their date when they deserve all the praise in the world for this book. All right, so 2 more books to go through, and these are both part of the same series. However, they, unlike Heaven's Official Blessing, could be, well, I wouldn't really read them on their own. I would still read them in order, but they each follow different characters. First up, we have Gloam. This is by Lily Mayne. This is book, what is this, 4 of the Monstrous series. The Monstrous series is a sci-fi male-male monster romance series where we follow different men and their monsters as they fall in love in post-apocalyptic America. Pretty much 20 years ago, there was a rift that formed, and all these monsters from a different planet kind of ran into our world. They were like, hey, let's check this out. Let's see what's going on here. And our military obviously bombed the shit out of them because what else would you do if a bunch of monsters came in? And in doing so, they actually kind of ended up destroying their own world because they bombed so much. And at this point, we are living in a post-apocalyptic America where you can either live in the walled cities, which are controlled by the military, a lot of poverty, a lot of disease, not a good place to be. You could also join the military. Will you be cannon fodder? Most likely. Or you can become a raider, which means living out in the wastes, and the wastes are considered very dangerous because there are a lot of monsters that are roaming free there, and it's not under the protection of the military. In this book, we are following a raider, and I would say his story begins a little bit in book 3. Pretty much there is a woman who seems to be collecting monsters and putting them on display for rich people. She travels the wastes with a guardian who is a big gray monster. He's got a big war hammer with him, and he has a metal cage over his head. And this character, Rig, decides that he is going to rescue this monster because obviously it doesn't want to be there. So he decides to tell Mary that he would like to join her on her quest, and he is kind of crossing the wastes with her while simultaneously getting to know Gloam and trying to find ways to rescue him, because Gloam seems not to be able to disobey Mary, despite the fact that he really wants to. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I loved this romance so much. I thought that the plot was really interesting, that we got to travel through the waste. We got to meet a very sketchy group of people. We got to interact with some new monsters. We also got to see a little bit more into how evil the military is, but most of all, I just absolutely loved the romance of the story. I think that they kind of had a similar dynamic to the characters in Soul Eater, which is the first one. I would not compare either of these characters to Win or Danny. However, I felt like the dynamic of a monster that is very strong, very powerful, very much has the ability to kill, falling in love with a human who is out in the waste, but however is very scared of the waste, who is very opposed to violence and to killing, and who very much does not want death to be part of the equation, no matter how evil they find someone, is a interesting dynamic that I really enjoy in this series that I got from Win and Danny, as well as Gloam and Rig. I thought that also, while Gloam was someone who could swing a war hammer and crack her skull open like a watermelon, was also incredibly sweet. His race of people were actually kind of like archivists, you would almost say. They were very much in the mindset that knowledge is the most important thing. He is incredibly intelligent. He can learn things really quickly. He has a love of languages. So I just thought that he was a really three-dimensional dynamic character. And Rig was someone who had some insecurities about his value in the world, in his ability to contribute to people. He's kind of a tinkerer, you could say. In his old camp, he was the one who would repair things. He would make sure that they had light sources, and he would kind of just tinker with the junk to make it useful again. But at the same time, he felt more like a piece of junk himself than anything useful. And throughout the story, as he saves Gloam and gives Gloam kind of this hope that life will be better and that he won't always be a prisoner again, he kind of starts to realize how much value he holds, not just to Gloam, but to his friends and from the camp that he had left. So I love this. 5 stars. This series is so good. That being said, I happily jumped into book 5, which was Moth, and I gave this one 5 stars as well. And I have to be honest, Moth and Charlie may give Danny and Win a run for their money. Danny and Win were my favorite characters. But Moth, oh my god, I love him so much. This man is half monster. So it seems that his parent had come to the human world before the rift was really torn open, because for a while the rift was kind of small and a few things slipped through. Their parent was one of them. Their parent uses they, them pronouns. They seem not to be a gendered species. However, Moth is identified as male, and this parent impregnates Moth's mother, and she ends up dying, giving birth to him, and then the rift opens and he kind of finds himself thrown around a little bit because he has some things to his body that prove that he's not fully human, and no one really wants anything to do that. So he very much grew up on the streets, and then eventually he kind of took up the sword, literally he has a sword, and started to go around the wastes on his own. And he feels incredibly isolated because there are monsters who see him as too human and hate him for that, and there are humans who see him as a monster and hate him for that, and he is just hated from both sides, and he is just so desperate to find a place where he can just be himself and not feel disgusting, because the way that humans look at him, he's apparently very beautiful at first glance, but then you start to look at him a little longer and you start to wonder if there's something wrong with him, and he just wants to find someone who actually thinks he's beautiful and doesn't think he's creepy, and wants to get to know him. And he's this brooding asshole, and he's very much, I would say, he gives off teenage energy a lot of the time. He's like, nobody understands me kind of vibes, but Charlie is very much like, hey, we gotta go on this journey together, and I'm not gonna put up with your behavior, so I'm gonna keep kind of pushing your buttons, I'm gonna keep teasing you kind of situation until you take these walls down, because the two of us really need to work together and trust each other, because we're out here in a dangerous place. And eventually, obviously, Charlie starts to realize that he doesn't like the way that other people treat Moth, and that the way that he feels about Moth is obviously very different than the way other people do. And Moth starts to realize that Charlie's feelings for him are different as well, and they start what is supposed to be kind of a casual sex. Charlie's like, hey, we're out here, we're gonna be out here for a while, you and me, we obviously think we're hot, you think I'm hot, I think you're hot, let's jump under these blankets kind of situation. And eventually, obviously, it becomes more than casual sex, if it was even ever casual sex from the very beginning. But Moth's character development throughout the story, and him just kind of learning to love his body and just feeling comfortable with having sex. He was very insecure about it because of how his body is different, and wanting to have sex just in the dark, and maybe withholding his own pleasure, and just fearful of how people would react to him kind of losing control in a way. Just watching him kind of find a safe place with Charlie was just so wonderful. I loved every moment of it. I was just I will say this book had the best smut I've ever read. I think I would be very confident saying that. There's something about an insecure man just throwing it into the wind and just losing control with the person that he feels safe and loved with, was just chef's kiss. There was also a couple scenes where someone got hurt and they had to take care of them, and it was just super. I also enjoyed the plot. I would say as this series goes along, the plot definitely develops a lot more, especially when it comes to military corruption and crimes. I am very intrigued to see where the author goes with that. There's a part of me that kind of wants all of these couples to come together, here comes the cavalry, and just take down the US military. Can a couple of gay boys do that? I'm sure they can, I believe. But overall, just absolutely loved these characters, especially Moth. So definitely I think I would feel safe saying that this has taken the spot of Soul Eater as the #1 book, but just by a little bit. But very, very happy that I finished the month on a 5-star read, and honestly, I would not be surprised if this ended up on my best books of the year. I mean, who knows? All right, guys, we did that. Was it rapid fire? I tried. If it wasn't, I'm sorry. But I had a really great reading month in January. I had a really great time with Squash That series. By the time that I'm filming it, it is now over, but I am super happy that I took part in that. So thank you, Bailey, for putting that on. I will of course have her channel linked down below if you would like to take part in any future rounds that we do. I would love to know if you have read any of these books that I read this month, or at least here in the second half, and what you thought of them. I would also like to know what your favorite and least favorite book of the month was. Obviously, Moth was my favorite book of the month, and funny enough, this being the last book I read this month, the first book that I read this month, Snow Place Like LA, was my least favorite. This was still a 3.5 stars, so I would in no way say that I disliked this book, but I would, if I had to decide a least favorite book of the month, go ahead and say it was that one. So thank you guys so much, as always, for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!